What exactly was the Pakistani leadership doing in Saudi Arabia? That was the question many observers were asking when Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif landed in Saudi Arabia accompanied by his powerful army chief Field Marshal Asim Munir. The Pakistani leadership even began the visit with Umrah at the Grand Mosque in Mecca. At first glance, it looked like a religious and diplomatic visit. But there was much more happening behind the scenes because what emerged from Mecca was a major defense agreement between Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Turkey, three countries with very different strengths but increasingly similar strategic concerns. The agreement says that an armed attack on one member will be treated as an attack on all three. In other words, this is not merely another diplomatic declaration. It is a commitment towards collective defense and collective deterrence, and thus analysts are calling it the Islamic NATO, where many more nations may join the grouping in the future. And that raises several very important questions. Why has Saudi Arabia decided to enter such an arrangement with Pakistan and Turkey? Is this primarily an alliance against Iran? What does this mean for America's traditional security role in the Gulf? And perhaps most importantly for us in India, what does a Saudi-Pakistan-Turkey military partnership mean for India? Because Turkey has already taken a clear pro-Pakistan position during India's recent military confrontation with Pakistan. Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, has traditionally maintained strong economic and strategic relations with India. So does this new alliance change that equation? That is what we will examine in today's World Report. Let's first understand what exactly has been signed. Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Turkey have announced what is being called the Mecca Joint Defence Agreement. These three countries have declared a shared commitment to strengthen their collective security goals and promote peace and stability in the region. But the most significant element is the collective defense provision. The Pakistani side has described it in very clear terms. An armed attack against any one of the three countries will be regarded as an attack against all three. That immediately makes the agreement strategically significant. But the pact is not restricted to sending troops in the event of a war. It reportedly envisages much deeper military cooperation. That includes joint research and development, technology transfer, defense procurement, and co-production of military equipment. And some of the areas specifically mentioned are highly advanced defense technologies. We are talking about unmanned aerial vehicles, air defense systems, naval engineering, and electronic warfare. There are also provisions of intelligence sharing, strategic planning, exchange of military personnel, and joint exercises involving the land, air, and naval forces. So essentially, the three countries are attempting to build an interconnected defense ecosystem, and this is where the agreement becomes particularly interesting because each country brings something different to the table. Saudi Arabia has money. Pakistan has military manpower, experience, and nuclear deterrence. Turkey has technology, manufacturing capability, and a substantial defense industry. Put these three together and you get a combination that could potentially be quite powerful. Saudi Arabia is one of the world's most important energy powers. It has enormous financial resources, but it has historically relied heavily on foreign countries for advanced military technology and security. Pakistan, on the other hand, has one of the region's most experienced militaries and is the only nuclear-armed country among the three. But Pakistan has a major limitation. It has financial constraints. It needs investment, technology, and access to larger markets. And then there's Turkey. Turkey has developed a formidable indigenous defense industry. Its drones, naval systems, and other military technologies have gained considerable international attention. But Turkey also needs markets and investment. So you can understand the logic. Saudi Arabia has capital, Turkey has technology and manufacturing, Pakistan has military manpower, institutional experience, and nuclear deterrence. It is a partnership where the strengths of a country can compensate for the weakness of the other. The timing of the agreement is extremely important. West Asia has been going through an extraordinary period of military instability. The escalation of regional hostilities has created serious security concerns for Gulf countries. Missiles and drones have threatened energy infrastructure. Shipping routes have faced growing risks. The Strait of Hormuz, the Red Sea, and the Bab al-Mandeb are strategically crucial not just for Saudi Arabia but for the overall global economy and the supply of oil to the world. And Saudi Arabia has found itself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. Its oil infrastructure and economic ambitions depend on regional stability. Remember, Saudi Arabia is also pursuing an enormous economic transformation through its development plans. But you cannot build a diversified, globally connected economy if your region remains engulfed in a conflict. And that brings to us the biggest question. Can Saudi Arabia continue to depend entirely on the United States for its security? For decades, the answer was effectively yes. The US-Saudi security relationship has been one of the most important pillars of the Gulf's strategic architecture. But Riyadh's confidence in that arrangement has been tested repeatedly. And Saudi Arabia appears increasingly interested in diversifying its strategic partners. That does not necessarily mean that Riyadh is abandoning Washington, but it does mean that Saudi Arabia may no longer want its security to depend on a single external power. And that is where Pakistan and Turkey enter the picture. Now the obvious question is this essentially a military alliance against Iran? There are certainly reasons why people would reach that conclusion. Saudi Arabia has been directly affected by the broader Iran-related regional conflict. Iran and groups aligned with Tehran have demonstrated the ability to threaten the Gulf's security. But Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has indicated that the agreement is not aimed specifically at Iran. The Turkish position is essentially that the pact provides collective security, but it does not designate a particular country as the enemy. And this distinction matters because Turkey has its own complicated relationship with Iran. Pakistan too shares a border with Iran. Islamabad cannot afford to openly turn this into an anti-Iran military alliance. So while Iran is clearly part of the strategic background against which this agreement has emerged, it would be too simplistic to describe the pact as simply Saudi Arabia, Pakistan and Turkey versus Iran. The reality is more complicated. These countries are attempting to create a greater strategic autonomy in the unstable region. Iran, unsurprisingly, has reacted critically. Iranian officials have questioned whether signing defense agreements with outside powers will actually make Saudi Arabia safer. The argument from Tehran is essentially that security cannot be guaranteed merely by bringing in more military partners. Iran's message to Saudi Arabia has been, instead of depending on America, Turkey or Pakistan, change the policies that create regional tensions. But Riyadh clearly appears to have reached a different conclusion. The Saudi leadership seems to believe that in an increasingly uncertain security environment, having multiple strategic partners gives it more options. And that is an important change in the West Asian geopolitics. For decades, the United States has been the ultimate security guarantor for many Gulf monarchies. American military bases, aircraft, missile defense systems, naval presence, and intelligence capabilities have played a major role in maintaining the regional balance. But the Gulf states have been increasingly began asking a difficult question. What happens if America is unwilling or unable to intervene when we need it? That question has become particularly important after years of regional conflict and shifting American priorities. So what Saudi Arabia is doing may not necessarily be choosing Pakistan and Turkey instead of America. It may be choosing Pakistan and Turkey in addition to America. And there is a major difference between the two. Riyadh may simply be saying, we don't want our security to depend on one country anymore. If that is the thinking, then Mecca Agreement could be a part of a much larger transformation in the West Asian diplomacy. Regional countries are building multiple partnerships instead of relying on a single superpower, and that could eventually produce a more multipolar Middle East. But where does India fit into all this? This is where things become particularly interesting for us. India's official response to the agreement has been cautious. The Ministry of External Affairs has said that India is closely following the development, and that is understandable because India has a very important relationship with both Saudi Arabia and Turkey. but those relationships are very different. Let's start with Saudi Arabia. India and Saudi Arabia have built substantial economic and strategic ties over the years. Saudi Arabia is a major source of India's energy imports. There are also significant Saudi investments and growing trade between the two countries. Indian workers in Saudi Arabia are another important component of the relationship. So India has strong reasons to maintain a close relationship with Riyadh. And there is no immediate reason to assume that Saudi Arabia's new defense agreement automatically turns it against India. But the equation with Turkey is very different. Turkey has openly supported Pakistan on several occasions. During Operation Sindoor, Turkey took a strong position in support of Islamabad. Turkey's leadership repeatedly expressed solidarity with Pakistan. There were also reports of Turkish-origin drones being used by Pakistan during the conflict and claims of Turkish technical personnel assisting Pakistani forces. These claims have been a matter of serious concern in India, and Turkey's political position was not limited to statements. Ankara was among the countries that backed Pakistan diplomatically during the confrontation. Pakistan's leadership subsequently expressed its gratitude to Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. So from India's perspective, Turkey is no longer simply another country with which it has a diplomatic disagreement. Turkey has emerged as a clear strategic partner of Pakistan, and now Turkey and Pakistan are entering into a former collective defense framework with Saudi Arabia. And that naturally raises questions in New Delhi. The biggest concern for India is, could Pakistan benefit militarily? This may actually be the most important part of the agreement for India. The pact specifically talks about technology transfer, joint defense production, research and development, procurement, and co-production of advanced military equipment. If that cooperation materializes on a significant scale, Pakistan could gain access to additional technologies, financing, and manufacturing opportunities. Saudi Arabia has the financial resources. Turkey has defense technology and production capabilities. Pakistan has a large military establishment and strategic requirements. That combination could strengthen Pakistan's defense capabilities over time. And therefore, even if the immediate objective of the pact is regional security or deterrence against threats from Iran and elsewhere, India cannot completely ignore its potential long-term implications for South Asia, because military technology does not remain confined to one battlefield. A drone developed through joint research for one strategic theater can potentially be deployed somewhere else. A new electronic warfare capability developed for West Asian conflicts can potentially strengthen another country's military, and enhanced defense production capacity can change the military balance over time. This is why India will be watching the implementation of the agreement very carefully. But should India worry about Saudi Arabia? Now this is where we need to be nuanced. It would be premature to conclude that Saudi Arabia has joined hands with Pakistan and Turkey to target India. There is currently no basis to make such a sweeping claim. Saudi Arabia has strong reasons to maintain its relationship with India. India is a major economy. It is an important energy market. There is substantial bilateral trade. There are significant Indian investments and Saudi investments connected to each other. So Riyadh is unlikely to casually sacrifice its relationship with New Delhi. But geopolitical relationships are rarely binary. A country can have strong economic ties with India and simultaneously deepen its defense relationship with Pakistan. The question is therefore not, is Saudi Arabia now against India? The more important question is, will Saudi Arabia's strategic relationship with Pakistan eventually influence its position in a future India-Pakistan crisis? I say this because Saudi Arabia may not be taking a position against India, but the finances that Mohammed bin Salman could invest in defense manufacturing and related sectors could strengthen both Turkey and Pakistan. Saudi Arabia may be pursuing this primarily in context of its own security concerns, particularly with respect to Iran. But the unintended consequence could be the strengthening of Pakistan's military capabilities, and that could eventually pose a challenge to India. So to conclude, what does all this mean for India? It would be premature to say that Saudi Arabia has chosen Pakistan and Turkey over India, or that this partnership is now directed against New Delhi. Saudi Arabia has its own security calculations, its own concerns about Iran, and its own ambitions for the region. But geopolitics is not only about intentions, it is also about consequences. Saudi Arabia may invest in this partnership to secure itself. Turkey may gain greater markets and influence. Pakistan may gain access to money, technology, and defense manufacturing capabilities. And that last part is what India needs to watch most carefully. Because Saudi money strengthening Turkish defense capabilities combined with Turkish technology and Pakistan's military establishment could eventually create a stronger Pakistan. What begins as a security arrangement in West Asia could therefore have consequences far beyond West Asia. This does not mean that Pakistan will suddenly become a greater military threat to India. Nor does it mean that Saudi Arabia has become India's adversary. But India cannot afford to look at this agreement only through the lens of Saudi-Iran tensions. New Delhi will have to ensure that its own relationship with Riyadh remains strong enough to withstand these changing strategic equations while closely monitoring how much technology, financing, and defense capability ultimately flows towards Pakistan. Because in geopolitics, the biggest risks are not always the things countries intend to do. Sometimes they are the consequences of what countries do for their own reasons. And the Mecca Agreement may have been born out of Saudi Arabia's search for security, but its long-term consequences could extend all the way to South Asia. For India, this is the real story to watch. This is Jash Hirani and you are watching World Report.